I'm Liv Wu. I'm an executive chef. I know a lot of you. I'm just delighted and honored to be introducing Joel. He's a hero of mine and a hero of a lot of us on the food team. I'm not going to say a lot except to tell you that this morning I was playing around on his website, the website for Polyface Farms. It's really a cool site to visit, foodie or no, or greenie or no. It's full of fun and full of really serious stuff and stuff that makes you think hard. But of course, I clicked on the buy turkey link because it's seasonal, and we just created, if you guys didn't know, an ability for us to group by heritage and organically raised turkeys that will be available to all of us through Google Green Grocer. But I clicked on turkey, and there was all this wonderful language that's so Joel that says it's wonderful, white skin, buttery, moist. It was a great sale. And then the last piece was a disclaimer that says, "We will not ship. We don't ship. Please go to your local farmer and buy your turkey there. And not only that, we suggest you go and visit the farm before you buy the turkey." And I just went, that is exactly what we do on the food team here. This is what makes us able to bring you great food and makes our consciences clear about what we're doing. You may try to drive an electric car or a hybrid car, but in fact, what you eat and how that food is produced is contributing hugely, as much as, if not more than, the car you drive to our environmental footprint. So I love the turkey link, and just with that, I will give the floor to Joel.
Thank you. Are these yours?
Nope. I need them, but they're not.
I need them, but they're not mine. All right. Well, it is a real distinct honor to be here at Google, and I do feel like a fish out of water because I have what's called anti-technology karma. Anybody who shows me how to do something on a computer, when I do the same functions, it doesn't work. It took me 10 minutes to get out of the parking lot at the Hilton this morning up at Burlingame because the room key card would not work in the, I watched the other cars in front of me all go through, put it in and run out, put it in, in mine, it doesn't work, so the gate doesn't come up. So it takes me 10 minutes to get out of the parking lot. I mean, that's just the way my life is, But I sure can make dancing earthworms. And in the continuum of things, probably most of us historically and in the future will be far more dependent on dancing earthworms than working key card slots out of a Hilton parking lot. So as my life has gone on, I have found myself more and more I call it archaic in our culture, because we live on a farm that has 4 generations living on it. My mother is a very healthy, happy octogenarian, will be 88 this winter. She still rides 5 miles a day on her stationary bike, drives ballroom dances, teaches English country dancing to people, and sings in the Happy Notes, which is an old, it's a group of retirees who entertains, and she'll pop in at our house when she drives to sing in this little chorus at the nursing home. She says, "We're going to sing to the old folks." And of course, half of them are younger than she is, but, and of course we have, Teresa and I are there, and our children are there, and their children are there. So we have 4 generations on the farm, all living in a commune. It's quite dramatic. It's quite amazing, and we grow our own food. I feel like we just live in this nest of abundance. We live in a time when a lot of people are concerned that we're teetering on the precipice of precariousness in a lot of things, economically, ecologically, socially, culturally. And so to live surrounded by a tribe that devoted to a common denominator and surrounded by abundance. We like to graze. I like to walk through the seasons. We have mulberries and pawpaws and pear trees and apple trees and grapes and strawberries. And I just like to graze. I always have this vision of campuses, whether they're like Google campuses or whether they're any kind of institutional campuses where all the ornamental landscaping is converted to edible landscaping. And you use your GPS technology to just let everybody know every morning when you get up with an app, the strawberries in quadrant 45 are ready to pick today. The asparagus in quadrant 87, pick some spears on your way to your office this morning. Why couldn't we do that? And the idea is to return us as a nest to an ecological womb. Wouldn't that do a lot to take the edge off of the fear and the concern that many of us have for some of the big picture items around our world? We could hook up the exercise room to water pumps that would pump water back up onto the roofs of all of our buildings that are growing strawberries and cucumbers, and that way we don't have to have any air conditioning, and it cools the building down so much that we use our human power to pump the water back up on the edible roof. And this stuff can be done. It's not out of the question. So as I live, the more I look at our culture, and I look at the fact that we are the first culture in human civilization that routinely eats unpronounceable food. We're the first culture in human civilization that routinely eats food that you can't make in your kitchen. You ever try to make high fructose corn syrup in your kitchen? We're the first culture in the world in history that has ever put 1,500 miles on average under every morsel of food. That's a long ways. In 1930, 1 calorie of food on the table took an average quarter calorie to get there. Today, every calorie of food on the table takes 15 calories of energy to get there. These are hockey stick graphs, and we all know that hockey stick graphs never last. And so what happened was, I'm leading up to why this book came out, was that as I tried to describe, looking for sound bites of how do I describe what I think has sustained and rejuvenated and regenerated and formed the glue for human existence for centuries, if not millennia, what I found was that this blip that we call modern America is extremely abnormal. And I run into young people every day, it's so fun to talk to a group here at Google. If I talk to a group of farmers, the average farmer is now almost 60 years old. And they can remember, a day before supermarkets. Today, most of us can't even remember a day before computers. My first book, I wrote on a typewriter. When I was in college, there was no computer. I want you to just think about this for a minute, okay? I can remember when TV dinners were introduced. Can you imagine? No microwave. I can remember a day when there was no takeout. I can remember when a salad bar buffet started in restaurants. That was started during the Vietnam War era. It was one of the biggest shocks of Vietnam veterans. They went and they came back and had salad bars. Where'd this come from? It was like boom, it hit the culture. But these are new things in our culture. And as I would explain these things and how when I was a kid, if you wanted to stay warm in the wintertime, I realize you don't have to worry about this in California, but where we are, if you wanted to stay warm in the wintertime, you had to get some heat in your house, and so we would cut wood. We had wood stoves, and we would cut wood. And my wife has inherited her grandmother's majestic wood cook stove that when she and Granddaddy went to housekeeping in 1929, that was state-of-the-art technology. this majestic wood cook stove that you put little kindling in on the side and had your hot water bath. That's where your dishwater got hot. It just kept hot water there all the time. You know, you see all the old westerns, you know, and the baby's getting ready to come, and the doctor says, you know, boil water. Well, that, you know, the water was always there. It was always ready. And that was new technology at that time. And so I just started mentioning this as I would describe these numerous things that we've come to today with supermarkets, with unpronounceable food, with computers, with the technology, you know, iPhones and iPads and Google, that it represents an abnormal blip in human history. And so what is this glue that is normal in civilization? And so I want to just spend a couple of minutes, and we'll go right to question and answers and discussion about some of these things that I think have been, are interesting, and they're in the book. Folks, This Ain't Normal. It describes what I consider to be abnormalities in our system. You see, so I want to talk about animals for a minute, because animals are much maligned in our culture. I mean, I've got one chapter in the book, the title is something like, My Aunt is my dog, is my cat, is my child. And what we've done in our culture, as we have Bambiited and Disneyfied our culture, you know, we ascribe anthropomorphistic humanism to animals. And so we have an animal rights movement that has eliminated, for example, wearing fur. You know, when I was a kid, teenagers would actually get their spending money by trapping foxes and mink and beavers and stuff. I mean, I'm not that old, okay? I'm not that old. I'm really 80. That's what good food does to you. But no, people would, you know, I remember very well old timers saying back in the 20s and 30s, you know, when I was a boy, these are, you know, people that are old enough to be my dad, in a community. This is how teens got money to go to the movies or get their first automobile or whatever. And fox skins brought $50 a piece. Today, they're less than $1, so nobody traps. And a lot of places in our country now are having problems with kids with rabies. 1 in 10 foxes has the mange because of this explosion, because we've extracted humans out of nature. And so what was the role of animals historically? Let's talk about chickens. Historically, chickens, because everybody likes chickens. I mean, chickens are like, you know, the coolest of the, you know, farm animals. So what was the role of chickens? Well, historically, they didn't have garbage trucks and landfills and enough excess food to just throw it away. So chickens were a garbage disposal salvage operation in the homestead and the farmstead. That's what chickens were. And that's one reason why peasants, chickens were a luxury, because there was no grain. Now let me talk about grain for a minute, because our culture, when you think farm, you tend to think grain. That's what we think in our culture. In fact, we subsidize the U.S. budget. U.S. don't look at me like you don't get this. Subsidizes 6 types of annual grain production. But in a day before cheap energy and machinery, if you wanted to plow a field to grow corn or barley or wheat, you had to walk all day behind an ox or a yak or a mule or a horse with a sharp stick. And it was arduous work. And, you know, at the end of the day, you look back and maybe an area the size of this room, you know, you actually got kind of torn up a little bit. And then you could go back and you could hand broadcast seeds, okay? And those seeds would grow, and then you had to hand weed those seeds to keep the weeds out of them. And then whatever grew, you could actually go in with a scythe and scythe it down, and then put it in a shock so it could dry. It actually ferments just a little bit because of the uneven moisture drying of the stalk, and that's one reason why people now have so much wheat gluten intolerance is because we're harvesting it so fast and drying it so fast, there's no tiny amount of fermentation that occurs in the grain to change the enzymes to digestible enzymes in the grain crop. Okay? So, you put it in a shock, and then you took it in to a hard floor, maybe a wooden planks or beaten lime or a rock or clay that you'd pounded real hard, anyway, a hard surface, and then you beat it, all right, with a flail, and then you would winnow it, all right, throw it up, and the breeze would blow through it and drive the chaff and the husks away. And at the end of the day, you look down, and oh, okay, now I've got some barley, and you carefully, sweep that up and put it now in something that you could store it away from rats and mice in a day before sheet metal, before mesh metal, in a clay pot somewhere, and hopefully that would last you until the next year's harvest. Folks, there wasn't enough grain left over to feed animals. That's why in the Bible, in Hosea, the prophet talks about a harlot being sold for 9.5 ephahs of barley. It's not because harlots were cheap. It's because barley was expensive. I'm trying to help us to understand here that this idea of cheap grain fundamentally changed the role and the place of farm animals that had been normal throughout history. And so now suddenly we had all this grain with our ability to tillage, machinery, cheap energy. So now we can go and we can plow up with a great big machine. Suddenly now the traditional role of the chicken, which was right next to the kitchen to eat the kitchen scraps and the peelings and all the stuff that came out, spoiled food, being in the day before refrigeration, food spoiled. What do? You don't throw it away. You feed it to chickens, and chickens then in return cycle it, all right, the ultimate recycling agent, and give us eggs in return. That was the traditional role of chickens. Today, we think we're green when we take our banana peels and our waste from the kitchens, put it on a truck, run with diesel power, especially biodiesel, and truck it off-site somewhere to a composting operation, and then people can buy the compost for their house plants or little ornamental flowers. What really would be green is to attach a chicken house next to each cafe, so that the scraps went right into the chicken house, the eggs come right back in, and now we don't have to truck the garbage anywhere or bring the eggs from anywhere. That's what I'm talking about is normal, okay? So I've just concentrated on chickens, but you could take every single animal. I'll do one more just to show where I'm coming from. Let's take cows, all right? What is the role of herbivores in nature? Historically, herbivores, the bison on the American plain, today the wildebeest on the Serengeti, the Cape buffalo in Botswana. We Americans, we modern day developed country people, are absolutely brain damaged when we talk about grass. When I say grass, everybody thinks about this close crop lawn out here, or a golf course, right? When I say grass, what I think about grass is Little House on the Prairie, when Ma and Pa wouldn't let, the girls go out past the stoop of the soddy lest they get lost. Lost? What do you mean? We think lost. Why, the city beautification committee would come and cite me for violating the ordinance for, having an unkempt lawn, right? No, I'm talking about grass. Like if you go today to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, they've preserved a 2-acre native prairie patch there. They use it with fire. You can walk out there. This grass is 12 feet tall. It's more than half an inch thick at the stem. It's thick as hair on a dog's back. You walk out there, I still get chills every time I even talk about it. It's an absolute biological, biomass, soil building, carbon sequestering cathedral. And you walk out in there in this 12-foot tall grass. Taller than the lights in this room, okay? And it's over your head, and it just blocks out the world. And then to imagine this rustling, waving mass of biomass for hundreds of miles out through the prairies. I mean, it is unbelievable. And so civilizations coalesced early on around grasses, perennials, and herbivores because that was the only really nutrient-dense product that could be produced without tillage. Because when all tillage was done with a crude stick or a wooden spade, it was too precious to do in any scale. And so that's why lamb, goat, camel, cow, yak, all right, became the centerpiece of civilizational diets. And fish, all right, because that could be fished. You didn't have to till to get seafood, and you didn't have to till to get the herbivore. And so that's why that became the centerpiece of dietary protocol around in every civilization. Today, with cheap grain, we have been able to abdicate this and plow up everything and confine the animals in houses where they neither salvage nor do anything except eat erosive, petrochemical dependent, ecologically debilitating annuals that are subsidized by U.S. domestic policy to make cheap food in concentrated animal feeding operations that have no comparison either ecologically or relationally or symbiotically or nutritionally to their forebears who filled a definite function in the ecology of the ecological womb. So what we've been able to do is extricate ourselves from this historic normalcy, which was the herbivore is the biomass restart button. The grass grows in an S curve. I call the, are you with me? S curve, all right. The bottom part I call diaper grass. This is teenage grass, and this is nursing home grass. Well, if my job is to take solar energy and metabolize it into decomposable biomass, carbon sequestering biomass, where of those three stages do I want grass more often than not? Teenage, not nursing home into senescence, and not diaper into, trying to toddle, but teenage, all right? And so if the grass is allowed to just grow and get old and die, it shuts down the photosynthetic thing, and if it stays very diaperish, it can never really kick into high gear. And so the herbivore was nature's way, before mowing machines and before cheap energy, was nature's way of pruning the biomass to restart the rapid biomass accumulation. An herbivore is an ecological biomass accumulation restart button. That's the role of herbivores in nature, all right? And when we go to grass-finished beef, grass-finished lamb, we reaffirm that normal role of the herbivore ecology in nature. We're the first culture, and I'm almost done, we're the first culture that views children as liabilities instead of assets. All cultures in history viewed children as a blessing. Today, we talk about the cost of raising a child. This is the first generation in which the average child has not had domestic chores. Kids used to grow up weeding the garden, picking beans, helping can applesauce, helping to cook. Today we call that child abuse. And I would suggest, and I know I'm speaking into the heart of our electronic plugged-in techno-glitzy world. And so I'm doing a dance here with you, all right? And I'm not a Luddite, and I love technology. I love microchip electric fencing and energizers and UV stabilized canvases and nursery shade cloths and polyethylene black plastic pipe and stainless steel and refrigeration, and there's a lot of cool things we've got today, all right? But I want to tell you something. Human self-actualization, human self-affirmation, I think, is actually encouraged and stimulated when we viscerally participate in the physical elements of life. And there is no comparison with looking back at the end of the day and seeing gleaming jars of fresh made canned salsa, for example, sitting on the shelf, that you've picked the tomatoes and you've sliced and diced and you've smelled it, and you've been viscerally involved, touching, smelling, shaping, moving it, and preserving it for the future. There's nothing that compares with the sight and the ability to participate and have a visceral relationship with that production on the shelf, compared to being the top performer in the latest video game. One is just cyber. And we see it in our interns. We've had interns come out of Dilbert cubicle type of situations. And they get there and they describe with trembling lips and deep emotion that for the first time they were able to build something that they could touch, sense, feel, and hear the voices of their team members in person. Powerful self-actualization. And finally, we're the first culture that has devoted so much time and energy to a national food police. The food police, you know about the food police. We call them the food safety people. I call them the food police, who for the first time in human history have told a culture that, it's perfectly safe to eat Mountain Dew, Twinkies, and Cocoa Puffs. But that raw milk, compost-grown tomatoes, and Aunt Matilda's pickles, now that's deadly. And so I want to end, because of this setting, I want to end with a thought about food innovation. Because folks, what has become normal in our culture, I'm suggesting, DiGiorno's frozen pizza, concentrated animal feeding operations, farms with no trespassing signs, food production models that you have to walk through sheep dip and put on a hazardous material suit to go visit. It's not food worth eating. And it's created a toxic landscape. Just try living downriver from a concentrated animal feeding operation or from a monospeciated spraying operation in the San Joaquin Valley. We know about this. There are many of us who believe that much of our pathogenicity, our type 2 diabetes, the fact that the U.S. leads the world in the 5 chronic debilitating diseases of cancer and diabetes and these things, there's a reason why that there's a connection here, because we lead the world in creating an abnormal food system. Now, if we're going to return our food system and our landscape policy to a more normal, sustainable, regenerative system, I would suggest that it was going to require the same kind of innovation that Google enjoys today, bringing innovation to the world. How does innovation happen? It happens in embryonic prototypes. The beginning of Google is not a 15,000 person campus in California. The beginning of Google is a couple wild ideas with lunatics sitting on their little computers, fooling around with stuff and dreaming and thinking, but starting small. And so what we've got right now is a desperate need in our food system to free up the innovators at the bottom, farmers like us, that are returning with high-tech, techno-glitzy stuff like electric fencing and four-wheel drive diesel tractors with, front-end loaders and chipper shredders and large-scale composting and all that kind of stuff. But taking that heritage normal biological cycling with a healthy dose of appropriate technology, marrying the two together and coming with an innovative antidote to the problems we face in our ecology and our food system. And we have to be able to start from the tailgate of a pickup truck, from an innovative kitchen in our homes. We have to be able to start there to access our neighborhoods and our communities with innovative antidotes to what Walmart and Costco are offering us. And so that's just as much as I'll say. You can ask more questions about the food police. That's as much as I'll say right now, but it is absolutely an innovation thread that runs through everything, and that's why innovation always occurs in the economic sectors of least governmental penetration. And that's why government regulation is stifling true innovation and antidotes to the problems of society. And so that's all I'll say right there about the food safe, about the food police. We can go on to more questions and answers. I think I'd like to stop right there. That gives you a few little tidbits of some of the things that are in this book, folks. This ain't normal. I think you'll find it a very broad cultural, and I think many of you, when you look at the result of having a Manhattan Project for ammunition, but not having a Manhattan Project for compost, you will get this wonderful epiphany that you understand some of the things that you've heard about elitism and we can't feed the world and these kind of things will be set in their cultural context as we carry the past into the future. Because my belief is that the chances are the next 100 years we will need to return to a more localized, truly solar-driven, carbon cycling, biomimicked kind of existence than we have learned to enjoy in the last 50 years as we have abdicated historical normalcy in our civilization. Questions, comments, anything at all? I don't know how this works.
Hi, Joel. Thanks for speaking today. So I think I buy into just about everything you're saying. But at the same time, I think in order for us to actually have the kind of change we want to have, we need more than just rich Bay Area people pulling for it. And I think the system is kind of stacked against, sustainable farmers, and the real cost of,
Sure.
Factory pork isn't what's reflected in the price.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, if I was spending most of my income on food, it's hard for me to then also get what we think is better, more humanely raised and sustainably raised stuff. So have you any thoughts on how you get the people who are kind of not us more bought into the system and make it possible economically for them to do? I mean, people like Alice Waters can say like everybody can afford this stuff, but in reality I don't think that's really true in every case. So how do we get people who aren't us to kind of pull for it too?
All right. Well, your question is well stated. I think there are two issues here. One is, how do we get more people to buy in, just philosophically? I mean, after all, a lot of people are still eating at McDonald's, and a lot of people still think they've eaten a great dinner when they've out of a box. I ran into an art teacher in Washington D.C. She said, I'm going to retire this year. I said, being a very astute male, I said, well, you don't look nearly old enough to retire. And she said, well, actually I'm not, but I'm frustrated. I said, why? She said, because we did our first art project this year, and the first art project is to bring in a cooking pot. All the kids have to bring this is 10th grade, high school, all right, bring in a cooking pot and draw it, because they come in different shapes and sizes, but they're fairly basic, easy to draw. And she said, so yesterday, I did the assignment, and all the kids looked at me, 22 in the class. They looked at me like I had two heads. I said, what's the problem? They said, we don't have a cooking pot in our house. I said, what do you do? They said, we just open the box and stick it in a microwave. So, I think the question is two things. One is, how do we get more people to just buy into the idea that I should have a relationship with my food? We live in a culture in which people are far more interested and passionate about the latest body piercing and hairstyle in Hollywood than they are about what's going to become flesh of their flesh and bone of their bones at 5 o'clock. And this is abnormal. Okay? Now, the answer to that is simply we have to lead by example. And that's where this headquarters is leading in the institutional edge by example. You know, what you've done here with your meal plan and with all these, with your sourcing and all that is leader. I call it leadership. And that's what needs to happen, is leadership by example. But the second part of your question is about the high price. And essentially it is the charge of this is really an elitist movement. This is really about elitism. Now, when anybody ever comes up to me and talks about the price of that they can't afford this food, I know this is very unpolitically correct, but that's okay. You won't find a lot of political correctness in this book. My first response is, okay, right now, we're going to get in your car, all right, and it better be a cheap car, not an expensive car, and we're going to go to your house or your apartment, wherever you live. And here is what we're not going to see where you live, because you can't afford this food, right? Okay, so here's what we're not going to see. We're not going to see any soda. We're not going to see any alcohol. We're not going to see any tobacco. We're not going to see any coffee or tea. I mean, you really can live without those things. We're not going to see any flat screen TVs, iPods. We're not going to see lottery tickets or Disney vacation cruises. We're not going to see $100 designer jeans with holes already in the knees. We're not going to see, are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the thing. The fact is, very, very, very few people have no choice about how to spend their money. And I would say, and I know, again, it sounds very uncharitable, but I would say that instead of us sitting here today, you know, picking the lint out of our belly button, stewing over how to deal with maybe the 2% who really have a problem, let's instead look around and say, well, all of us that can, what's my problem? What's my excuse? And the fact is that if the 98% of the people who could do something would do it, it would so fundamentally change the fringes that the argument would change in a way that we can't even imagine. You know, it's like people with a 4-acre suburban lawn coming together at their garden club meeting and stewing about, you know, the 4-child single mom in Harlem that can't grow a garden. Well, why don't all you people grow a garden? We got 35 million acres of lawn in this country. 36 million acres growing food and housing recreational horses. That's 71 million acres. That's enough to feed the whole country without a single farm. So the point is, everyone who can should, and if everyone who could would, it would so fundamentally change the parameters of the argument that we can't even imagine the innovation that would punch out the other side. And if it became more normal again, a lot of things would happen, economies of scale, just, you know, regular things that happen with, you know, when something becomes more normal. Next question. Yes.
Hi, I'm from the Big Island of Hawaii. I have a farm and a community there. We integrate chickens, we make biochar, we generate our own inputs. It's all very lovely.
Wow, you are weird. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I was, yeah. A lot of us here are technologists, and sometimes when technologists go into agriculture, they get really into the carbon.
Absolutely.
And all the,
Yeah.
We
That's cool.
geek out on agriculture. Yep. Anyhow, ultimately, though, like many people in agriculturally sustainable parts of the world, it's not economically sustainable. We weren't able to, for instance, build a house for our growing family. So, like many, many families, one of us has to leave and go to the city, or Google in my case, and be either, you know, wash cars with rich people or be a software engineer in my case.
Right.
And send the money home to the farm. This is like, it's common. It's tragic in a way. I mean, I would love to be there with my chickens and my grass and everything. But it's this. Could you say some words about the people who have to leave the farms to make it work because because the system is stacked against actually
Yes.
doing
Yes.
it the right way.
Well, if you would like me to, I can say, "Bless you, my son." You know.
Thank you. Amen.
But in actuality, your point's well. Look, we haven't gotten where we are overnight, and we won't get out of it overnight. And as you know, all innovation requires disturbance. We know that. All succession, all freshening up, whether it's for ideas, technology, policy, it all requires disturbance. And so what you're going through in your life right now is the disturbance of an innovative idea that you have brought to your home, your family. Chances are you didn't grow up on a farm. Chances are, you have this green bug in your genes somewhere, both GEN and JE. I mean, both in your okay, and you have this thing that is wanting you to move forward that way, and a lot of people do. A lot of people really want to do something with their hands as a craftsman or an artisan. And I think our culture has failed the blue collar craftsmanship of our age by worshiping just intellectual, academic, cerebral pursuits without appreciating the balancing groundedness that calluses and not to mention immunofunction occurs when we assault our immunological function with exercise, with calluses and splinters and dirt under our fingernails or grease or whatever. And so what you see then are you see so many people with physical, visceral hobbies, whether it's building sailboats or gardening or doing something. We've got now people learning to cut meat. In big cities, they're like used to be Tupperware parties. Now there's meat cutting parties. And why? Because people want to get in there and touch it and sense it. It's the Lexus and the olive tree phenomenon. And so in a place like this, you see it very acutely. And so I think that what you're trying to do is absolutely phenomenal and laudable. And I think there are principles that hopefully you can. I wrote a book, You Can Farm.
I read it.
That can hopefully help stimulate some creativity in how to jumpstart that forward. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is leave a legacy that has moved us innovatively in some direction. And maybe you won't accomplish it completely even in your lifetime. In fact, I've heard if a vision can be accomplished in your lifetime, it's too small. and so just, my dad used to say, if at first you don't suck a seed, just suck and suck and suck until you do suck a seed. And so just keep after it, Keep after it. And remember that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly first. We've all heard grandma, we come to adulthood, we're children and we're willing to experiment with things. And we come to adulthood and we become paralyzed with analysis and fear because we can hear, grandma over our shoulder, if it's worth doing right, And the fact is, nobody does it right the first time. Nobody. It would be equivalent to, to going to a family shindig and here's the little toddler. And the first time Janie, tries to stand up, she, gets up on a chair, and she looks around wide-eyed, and everybody goes, "Oh, look, Janie's starting to stand." And of course, she gets this big grin. All of a sudden, she loses her grip on the chair, falls down on her diaper, and all the adults gather around and say, "Well, Janie, if you can't walk any better than that, just quit." We don't do that, do we? We say, "Oh, wow, she's doing." And the fact is, all of us toddle first. All of us toddle first. And so if it's worth doing poorly first, and just be encouraged by that, and just keep going after it.
Your answer to Kevin's question was more or less, there's a lot of people out there who can't afford to eat well, and your answer was, well, they can't afford to eat well, they just choose not to. So
Yes.
how do you change the mindset and convince them that it's something that's worth doing as opposed to something that's not worth doing? And then I have a second question, which is, if you were king for a day and could change 3 policies or behaviors or do three things to fix the U.S. food system, what three things would those be?
Oh my! Well, boy, you moved this question. Okay, so we'll go to your king for a day one. Yeah, because I do believe that it is a mindset. I did a class for a college. It was a real elite girls private college on global food issues. The professor of global food issues wanted me to come and be a guest lecturer. I said, let's do something different, So I said, get us a classroom with a cooking range, with a range in it. I said, you go and get some salsa and some good local artisanal cheese. I'll bring some apple juice from my neighbor's apple orchard, biological apple orchard. I'll bring some eggs and bring some skillets, okay? So we went in there and I did omelets for these college students, 60-second omelets. And we had this salsa, we had this cheese, we had this apple juice to die for. I mean, it's cold pressed, got an inch of sediment in the bottom. I mean, you got to be careful drinking it because you can suddenly guzzle a glass of, I just ate 6 apples, and you have 24 hours to work through this event. But anyway, we did these wonderful omelets, for $1.50 a plate in 2 minutes per. So I asked the students, I said, because college students are always, forlorn, no money, no time, blah, blah, blah. I said, so how many of you watched a movie this week? All of them. How many of you put any money in a vending machine this week? All of them. Okay? See, we live in a culture that's all about victimhood. Victims, victims, victims. I mean, and we're hardwired to remember what stops us, not what makes us go. That's why we call them stoplights and not go lights. Okay? So we dwell on the negative. We dwell on the negative. And so, the positive part of the question, if I were king for the day, what couple of policies would I do to really move this forward? Whew, that is a big one. The first one I would do is to eliminate all farm subsidies. All subsidies. All these things that, and you know what, there are a lot of things that aren't overt farm subsidies. They're kind of sweetheart deals. Things that, for example, make it cheaper to bring a container load of apples from China than pick apples from our own trees. Because that's, if you use, because of all the laws regarding that. So I would certainly eliminate all the subsidies. The second thing that I would do is I would amend the Constitution with a food emancipation proclamation. And I would grant every citizen of the United States, and it's funny, but I'm dead serious about this. I would grant every citizen of America the right to food freedom of choice. We do not have that in our culture. And the Food and Drug Administration now, in response to several suits filed by the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, which I call the NRA of food choice in our country, and everybody should join it because I want it to be as big as the NRA. You see, we've been granted the freedom to own guns, worship, assemble, speak. Well, what good is it to have those freedoms if you don't have the freedom to choose the fuel to feed your 3 trillion member internal community of beings that fuels you to go shoot, pray, and preach? The only reason that our founders did not give us the freedom of food choice is because they couldn't have imagined a day in which you couldn't buy raw milk from your neighbor. And California has now, incarcerated these 3 folks down in Los Angeles for having the audacity to take their herd share goat milk from their own animals off the farm and drink it in their own homes with their own families. Now, folks, this is tyranny. And we're supposedly fighting tyranny around the world with our military while our own USDA food police send SWAT teams out to farmers and confiscate food out of domestic freezers to keep families from being able to eat foods of their choice. So I would emancipate food from its enslavement by Monsanto's agenda. And anyone who thinks Monsanto is your friend, think again. We have trespass law in this country. If I came to your house or your yard and dumped a bunch of garbage in your lawn that you didn't want, I'd probably, the prosecuting attorney would come after me for trespass violations, right? But Monsanto can go and dump promiscuous pollen. Those are interesting words. Promiscuous pollen that runs rampant around the community, creating sexual orgies in my plants with life forms of garbage that I don't want. And our country, our own president, our Democratic president thinks that I should have to pay Monsanto a royalty for the privilege of their promiscuous pollen. This ain't normal. So I would absolutely say, you know what? You own you. And you can word it however you want to. But I would say every person is now, if you want to take responsibility for your own personhood and your own 3 trillion member internal community of beings, you can do it. You can do it. You know. And now, if you don't want to, and you still want a USDA stamp on all the food you eat, you know, to certify that it's gone through the industrial food fraternity, that's fine with me. And you will find me, I will not be picketing McDonald's, I will not be picketing the World Trade Organization talks, I'll not be picketing Monsanto. What I want is to let we Native Americans who honor heritage indigenous foods to be able to eat it and for you to be able to buy it. And if we did that, folks, if we did that, you would see an explosion of cottage industry and domestic food systems like you cannot imagine. Everywhere I go around the country, this is a very unusual group for me to talk to. My bread and butter has been sustainable ag groups, farmers, and eco, greeny type food people, okay? And everywhere I go, there is just this almost like a bull in the stall at the rodeo, right before they let him out, or a horse right before a horse race. There's just this chafing at the bit, ready to make, egg noodles or quiche from my garden produce, or lacto-fermented sauerkraut, or charcuterie, or artisanal cheese. There's this. People are just nuts about this. But in between them and their neighbor and you is this huge food police that says, oh, you can't make pickles in your house and sell it to a neighbor. That's manufacturing. You live in a residential community. So I have a lady in Texas that just told me she got fined by her homeowners association because there's an anti-farming language in their homeowners association, and she grew a tomato plant in her flower garden, and that's farming. So we have taken our Western Greco-Roman reductionist, linear, compartmentalized, fragmentized, systematized, disconnected, individualized, parts-oriented kind of thinking to an unbelievable philosophical apartheid. And I think that those of us who want to come back together in a more Eastern, holistic, we're all related, and let me own my own body, those of us who want to do that and live in our teepees and have our medicine man and educate as runners instead of mathematics, those of us who want to do that should be able to opt out of the greater cultural, that normalcy may not vanish from this side of our world. Question?
Well, how to follow that one up. So it seems that you're describing a really wedged situation here with the laws and how the money flows. And one of the characteristics of a wedge like that is that the people who are benefiting the most are the beneficiaries of the monies coming from the government, and they have power.
Right.
How do you break a cycle like that?
How do you break a cycle?
Critical.
Well,
Yeah.
that's why I didn't say, notice I didn't say if I were a king for a day, I would shut down Monsanto. See, a lot of my friends would say that. If I were king for a day, I would outlaw concentrated animal feeding operations, or I would you know what I'm saying? Or I would outlaw genetic modification or whatever. See, I didn't say any of those things. See, I really believe, and I think I'm at home in this company here to say this, I really believe that the greatest innovation and the greatest opportunity is when we allow people to self-actualize their own individual expression. That's why on our farm, we create habitats to preserve and enhance the pigness of the pig, the chickenness of the chicken, and the tomatoness of the tomato. It's in that environment of phenotypical distinctive expression that you capture the essence of the person and the essence of the gifts and talents they bring to the table. And so, yes, it is a wedge. And that's why I think that rather than trying to regulate out and you know, cherry pick out what we don't like and regulate that out, if we just allow the people, I mean, right here, the people who want to eat differently and buy differently and by one meal at a time create a different landscape for their grandchildren. If we allow them to do that, it would just completely topple Monsanto, Tyson, Ciba-Geigy. The only reason that they're able to enjoy their position at the top is because they're protected from competition at the bottom that has absolutely jumped ship. You know, very few people, I think, really trust craft food to take care of them anymore. You know, we've been there, done that, okay? And look where we are. You know, we've exchanged 18% food costs and 9% health care to 9% food costs and 18% health care. I mean, we've been there and done that. And so people, just like they're looking for breastfeeding, Lamaze, homeschooling, free food in an institutional setting. Who would have dreamed of this 5 years ago? Who would have dreamed of it? Okay, this is indicative of an entire desire to not entrust the current powers that be with my body, my food, and my being. And so what we need to do is just free up that move, okay, and let it go. And that's what scares the current big players to death. But that's where I'm coming from: freedom from the bottom up, not from regulation the top down. That's the difference.
I love finding this, and I want to read it and have you comment on it. You call it scaling up without selling your soul. Many successful entrepreneurial startups morph into Wall Streetified empires that lose their distinctives. And in the process, the business chews up and spits out its workers and founders in a mad scramble to dominate something. Does middle ground exist between the calm, talking stick consensus circle of indigenous Eastern tribal cultures and the mad scramble frenzy of Western capitalism? Or perhaps more to the point, in light of recent Wall Street and economic developments, what values are more important than growth, especially since cancer is growth? Please talk about this, whether it's the food chain or larger.
Sure. What she just read was something I wrote, actually. You didn't say that I wrote it, but I wrote that in response to, I'm going to be very personal with you, as our farm grew and our business grew, we saw small entrepreneurial endeavors like ours be gobbled up. Look at the organics today, and look at the takeovers of the little innovative organic players in the game, and they've been bought up by the big food companies. Okay, we got scared, frankly, because we didn't want to get gobbled up like this and sell our soul, and so we developed a 10-step value statement for Polyface Farms that is a totally anti-Wall Street empire building capitalistic value statement that I gave first to Fortune 500 middle managers at the Innovation Immersion Summit in Phoenix, Arizona, about 5 years ago. And I've given it several times, and it probably should be a book. But as we looked at what is it that defines us as opposed to a typical like global Wall Street type capitalistic corporation, there were distinctives that came about. And I won't give them all 10 to you, but I'll give you a few. The first one was, so we resolved ourselves that we would never have a sales target. No sales target. We don't measure success by sales. As soon as you start measuring success by sales, or you create quotas, or you say we want to be at this stage by such and such a date, this many customers or this many sales, as soon as you do that, you begin looking at people as commodities to buy, sell, and trade. In my scramble to the top of the heap, notches in my hatchet, if you will. Okay. And so we want sales to be an organic, almost a serendipitous outgrowth of quality and service. And so we don't assume, this brings me to my second, the segue. The second one is we will never advertise. All growth, if it's going to be, has to come from satisfied word of mouth. Now, it's fascinating to me that even the companies that spend $2 million for a 30-second Super Bowl ad still get 70% of their customers, according to the business journals, by satisfied customers, word of mouth. It still works. And so that is certainly, a mantra here at Google. It works. So we don't assume if sales drop off, we don't assume, well, we're not spending enough on advertising. We assume that we must not be giving the quality or the service or whatever, okay? In other words, and what this does is instead of immediately making us look outside, it makes us look inside. And we think that's healthy for the organism. Another one is that we will never patent or copyright. Whoa, talk about anti-Wall Street. Here's the deal. We want to be lean and mean. And if we never patent anything, then that means we have to stay lean and mean to stay one head against the copiers. And if we can't stay one stride ahead of the copiers, then we don't deserve to be in charge. Because really, all these ideas are just gifts. And I know that's a real big one, okay? Especially since this morning I was reading about Steve Jobs and the antipathy between Apple and Google, and I'm watching all of your Apple computers here and realizing a lot of Google money bought Apple computers. So anyway, the idea here is that innovation really, in a lot of ways, is just is very much a stroke of blessing, genius, and epiphany. And so the innovators should be sharp enough to stay a little bit ahead of the copycatters. So those are just three, but there are 10 of these that we have identified. One is defining a fourth one is defining our market. We won't deliver more than 4 hours away from the farm, because 4 hours out and 4 hours back is about as much as one person can drive in one day, which creates an ability for transparency. We don't want to ship anywhere. We want people to come to the farm. We have a 24/7, 365 open door, unannounced policy. Instead of a no trespassing sign, we want to put up a sign that says trespassers will be impressed. And that's our commitment to transparency. We're not concerned about copycatters. We're not concerned about diseases, because our animals have an immune system. We want people to come and viscerally participate in this, so that when we sit down to dine, to this intimate experience of dining, there is a partner we've danced with prior to the meal. And that creates integrity. Maybe one more. What's our time like? One more and we're over? Okay, one more.
Thank you, Joel, for everything
Yes.
you do. We really, really appreciate it. You mentioned the power of word of mouth,
Yes.
and that's definitely something we're working on here at Google and we're aiming to look at and get better at. We've announced some things that are coming along those lines. I think you would find some people in this room and in this company that would be very willing to help you get your message out. Given your difficulty with the swipe card at the hotel this morning, is there anything we can do as individuals or as a company to help you get that message out?
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, I would say, well, for one, is that's one reason I like to write. Because to me, that is a way, and this is, by the way, available on audio and Kindle, this book. But to get this kind of thinking penetrated into our culture, I mean, you guys, when you say you want to help, you have a great big voice here. You have a huge voice. And your voice to bring balance can be extremely powerful. And so I think that individually, in your ripple of influence, you can add things to the pot, whether it's how you eat, where you recreate, what you do, what you value as an individual, and then as a corporation, as a business. There are certainly things that you could do, like you're doing, more of the same. And continuing to use your purchasing power. I mean, I'm hearing about buying whole animals. That's a big deal. Okay, so the cafes have to work together. This one wants, T-bones, and this one does meatloaf. Okay, so you get together and you use the whole animal, and you use some blemished fruit, and you use some blemished tomatoes, and maybe Google could start a cannery here. Maybe you could have some canning classes and take this one step further in domestic food preparation to stimulate domestic culinary arts. Because ultimately, this big change is not going to occur. I mean, it can't occur just with the farmers and just with the food preparers or chefs or processors. It ultimately has to penetrate to the way we live, so that our homes, rather than just and our kitchens, rather than just being a pit stop between everything that's important in life out there, actually become the epicenter of our values, our lives, and our economic commerce. That we domesticate our values, and that is something that all of us can work on. And that's something I'm sure that Google can continue to work on when I hear about 3-hour commutes and that sort of thing. And so telecommuting, working from home, those kinds of things are ways to move that, to take this information economy and move it to the next step, which is the regenerative economy. That's the next step we've got to go. We've been the agrarian, we've been the industrial, we've been the information. Now we've got to move on into the regenerational economy. Okay, everybody, thank you for letting me visit with you. Now may all of your carrots grow long and straight. May your radishes be large and not pithy. May your drip irrigation never spring a leak. May your kitchens be places of aesthetic, aromatic, romantic sensuality. And may we all commit ourselves to making a world better than we inherited. Blessings on all of you. Thank you so much.